The year is 1931. A man named James Truslow Adams sits down at his desk and writes a book called The Epic of America. In it, he coins a phrase that will go on to shape the psychology of an entire civilization. He calls it the American Dream, and he defines it as a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. Read that again. No mention of a house, no mention of a car, no mention of a six-figure salary. Now fast forward to today. The average American household carries $104,215 in debt. Student loan borrowers collectively owe more than $1.77 trillion, more than the entire GDP of Canada. The median home price has crossed $400,000, while the median household income sits around $80,000. And roughly 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, including people earning six figures. So somewhere between 1931 and now, something happened. The dream didn't disappear, it got a price tag, and then that price tag got financed at 7.5% interest. This video is about the machinery behind that transformation, how America built the most powerful aspiration engine in human history, and then figured out how to monetize every moving part. We're going to walk through the education system, the housing market, the healthcare apparatus, the credit industry, and the cultural psychology that holds it all together. Not to be cynical, not to say the dream is dead, but to understand, with precision, why dreaming in America is so expensive, and who profits when you do. Let's get into it. 1. The gospel of you can be anything. Let's start where it starts for almost everyone, childhood. You're 5 years old, maybe 6. You're sitting cross-legged on a carpet that smells like apple juice and industrial cleaner, and your teacher asks the class a question that feels, at the time, like the most important question in the world. What do you want to be when you grow up? And you say astronaut, or president, or veterinarian. And the teacher smiles, and your parents smile, and nobody in the room says, well, that depends on your zip code, your parents' credit score, and whether or not your state funds its public schools through property taxes. Nobody says that. Because in America, the first lesson you learn, before long division, before cursive, before you can even spell the word opportunity, is that you can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is work hard enough, believe deeply enough, and want it badly enough. This is the foundational mythology. And let's be fair, it's a powerful one. There's a reason people from every corner of the planet still want to come to the United States. The idea that your birth doesn't have to dictate your ceiling is genuinely revolutionary. For most of human history, in most civilizations, it did. If your father was a farmer, you were a farmer. If your mother was a seamstress, you learned to sew. America said no. America said you get to choose. The American aspiration machine has produced extraordinary outcomes. The child of immigrants has become a Supreme Court justice. The kid from the trailer park has built $1 billion company. These stories are real. They are not fabricated. The problem is not that they're false. The problem is that they're rare, and they're presented as if they're normal. Let's talk numbers. A landmark study by economist Raj Chetty and his team at Harvard's Opportunity Insights project tracked millions of Americans born between 1978 and 1983. What they found is now one of the most cited findings in modern economics. A child born into the bottom fifth of the income distribution in the United States has roughly a 7.5% chance of reaching the top fifth as an adult. That's not zero. But it's not the meritocratic rocket ship you were promised on that carpet in kindergarten either. For context, that same probability is higher in Denmark, Canada, Norway, Finland, and Germany. The country that invented the phrase, the American dream, is now outranked in upward mobility by countries that Americans sometimes dismiss as socialist. But here's what makes America's version unique. It's not just that mobility is lower than advertised. It's that the belief in mobility remains sky high. A 2018 study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics found that Americans consistently overestimate the probability of moving from the bottom to the top quintile. In survey after survey, people guess rates of upward mobility that are 2 to 4 times higher than the actual data shows. This is not an accident. This is the product of a culture that treats optimism as a civic duty and skepticism as a character flaw. Think about it. In America, if you say, "the system is rigged," you're told you have a bad attitude. If you say, "I can't afford it," you're told you're not being resourceful enough. If you say, "this isn't working," someone hands you a self-help book with a sunrise on the cover and tells you to visualize your success harder. The entire motivational industrial complex, the $14 billion self-improvement industry in the US, according to market research, exists to reinforce a single message. If you're not succeeding, the problem is you, your mindset, your energy, your willingness to wake up at 4:45 a.m. and journal about gratitude while the sun is still asleep. And look, mindset matters. Personal responsibility matters. Nobody serious is arguing otherwise. But when an entire culture builds its identity around the idea that outcomes are determined by individual effort, it becomes very difficult to talk honestly about the structures that shape those outcomes before effort even enters the equation. Structures like school funding. In the United States, public schools are funded primarily through local property taxes. This means that if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, your school gets more money, better teachers, better facilities, more AP classes, more counselors. If you live in a poor neighborhood, your school gets less, fewer resources, larger class sizes, older textbooks, if there are textbooks at all. According to EdBuild, a non-profit that studied school funding disparities before shutting down in 2020, the most affluent school districts in America receive roughly $23 billion more per year than the poorest ones. So the kid on the carpet who says astronaut in a suburb of Connecticut and the kid on the carpet who says astronaut in rural Mississippi are both being told the same dream. But one of them is sitting in a school that has a planetarium, and the other is sitting in a school that can't keep the lights on in the bathroom, and yet the message remains the same. Work hard, dream big, and you'll make it. This isn't just optimism, it's a load-bearing psychological structure. Because if people believe the system is fair, they don't demand that the system change. If people believe failure is personal, they don't look for failure in the design. The dream, in this sense, isn't just inspirational, it's functional. It keeps the architecture intact by making every crack in the foundation feel like an individual problem rather than an engineering one. The late comedian George Carlin put it more bluntly. He said, "It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." That's a joke. But underneath the joke is a structural observation. The dream serves the dreamer and the system the dreamer operates in. You chase, you spend, you borrow, you consume, and the economy, which is 70% driven by consumer spending according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, keeps turning. So the first bill doesn't come in the mail, it comes in the programming. Before you ever sign a loan document or swipe a credit card, you've already been enrolled in America's most expensive course, believing that everything you want is one decision away, and that the only thing standing between you and the life you deserve is you. The tuition for that belief we'll get to it section by section. 2. The college promise and the $1 trillion receipt. You're 17 years old, senior year, and every adult in your life is asking you the same question with the same barely concealed panic in their voice. So, where are you going to college? Not if you're going. Where? Because in America, the college question isn't really an academic question. It's a class question, a status question, a question about what kind of person you're going to be, and, by extension, what kind of person your parents were. And the answer is supposed to be a name, preferably a name people recognize, preferably a name that makes someone at a dinner party nod slowly and say, "Oh, that's a great school." Nobody sits you down at 17 and explains the math. Nobody hands you a spreadsheet that says, "Here is the average starting salary for your intended major. Here is the total cost of attendance over 4 years. Here is what your monthly loan payment will be. Here is how long it will take you to break even." Instead, you get brochures. You get campus tours with backward walking guides pointing at buildings named after donors. You get the phrase "investing in yourself," repeated so many times it starts to feel like a financial strategy instead of what it actually is. A marketing slogan designed to make a 6-figure expenditure feel like personal growth. Let's walk through the numbers, because the numbers are where the dream meets the invoice. The average cost of tuition and fees at a 4-year public university in the United States for the 2024 to 2025 academic year is approximately $11,610 per year for in-state students. For out-of-state students, it's roughly $24,030. For private non-profit institutions, it's approximately $44,350 per year. And that's just tuition and fees. Add room, board, books, transportation, and the occasional meal that isn't ramen, and you're looking at total costs of attendance that can easily reach $30,000 to $40,000 per year at a public university and $60,000 to $90,000 per year at a private one. Now, here's the part that never made it into the brochure. In 1980, the average annual tuition at a 4-year public university was approximately $800. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $3,000 in today's dollars. The actual cost today is nearly 4 times that in real terms. At private institutions, the increase is even steeper. According to data from the College Board, the inflation-adjusted cost of tuition and fees at private non-profit 4-year institutions has roughly tripled since the early 1980s. What happened? Several things, but the single most important structural change was the shift from state funding to student funding. In the 1970s and 1980s, state governments covered a much larger share of public university budgets. Students paid a relatively modest portion. But starting in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s and 2000s, states began cutting per-student appropriations, sometimes gradually, sometimes dramatically during recessions. According to the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, SHEO, state funding per student, adjusted for inflation, was roughly $8,489 in 2001 and fell to around $7,460 by 2022. Some states slashed far more aggressively. Between 2008 and 2018, for example, Arizona cut per-student funding by nearly 55% and Louisiana by about 40%, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. The universities didn't shrink, they didn't simplify. In many cases, they did the opposite. They built luxury dorms, state-of-the-art rec centers, and administrative empires that would make a mid-sized corporation blush. The number of university administrators in the US grew by more than 60% between 1993 and 2009, outpacing the growth in faculty by roughly 10 to 1, according to a study by the Goldwater Institute. Someone had to pay for all of that, and that someone was you, the student, the dreamer, the 17-year-old who was told this was an investment. And the instrument that made it all possible? Federal student loans. Here's how the machine works, and this is important, because understanding the mechanics is more useful than just being angry about the outcome. The federal government, through programs like the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program, guarantees access to student loans for virtually anyone admitted to an accredited institution. This sounds generous, and in one sense, it means a kid from a low-income family can attend college. But there's a side effect that economists have been screaming about for decades. When you guarantee that students can borrow virtually unlimited amounts, especially through Grad Plus loans, which cover the full cost of attendance with no aggregate limit, you remove the price sensitivity from the demand side. In plain English, if students can always borrow more, schools can always charge more, and they do. This is what economist William Bennett called the Bennett hypothesis back in 1987, the idea that increases in federal financial aid allow colleges to raise tuition with relative impunity. For years this was debated, but a 2017 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found substantial evidence supporting it, concluding that for every additional dollar in subsidized loan maximums, tuition increased by as much as 60 cents. So let's connect the dots. The government tells you college is the path to the middle class. The culture tells you not going is failure. The schools raise the price because they can. The government offers you loans to cover the price. The price goes up again. The loans get bigger. And by the time you're 22, you're walking across a stage in a cap and gown carrying a piece of paper and $37,574 in average student loan debt, which is the current average for a bachelor's degree recipient, according to the Education Data Initiative. But here's the part that really tightens the vice. Unlike virtually every other form of consumer debt in America, credit card debt, auto loans, medical debt, even gambling debt. Student loan debt is nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. This was codified in stages, most notably in the 2005 Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act, which extended non-dischargeability to private student loans as well. The logic, such as it went like this. If students could just declare bankruptcy after graduation, they'd game the system. The result? You can finance a boat, crash it into a dock, declare bankruptcy, and walk away. But you cannot walk away from the loan you took out at 18 because a guidance counsellor told you it was the responsible thing to do, and the interest keeps compounding. The current federal interest rate for undergraduate direct loans disbursed in 2024 to 2025 is 6.53%. For graduate plus loans, it's 9.08%. These aren't predatory by payday loan standards, but when applied to balances of $50,000, $100,000, or $200,000 plus for graduate and professional degrees, they generate repayment totals that can dwarf the original principal. There are borrowers who have paid more than they originally borrowed and still owe more than they started with. That's not a glitch. That's negative amortization, and it's a feature of income-driven repayment plans when monthly payments don't cover accruing interest. So here you are. You did everything right. You listened to the adults, you went to the good school, you invested in yourself, and now you're 26 years old, earning $55,000 a year in a job that didn't require your degree, sending $400 a month to a loan servicer, watching your balance barely move, and wondering when exactly the investment is supposed to start paying off. And the wildest part, if you complain, if you say this out loud, there's a decent chance someone will tell you that you should have chosen a more practical major, as if a 17-year-old should have had the market foresight of a hedge fund analyst, as if the entire system wasn't designed to say yes at every turn, yes to the application, yes to the enrollment, yes to the loan, and never once say, "Are you sure this is worth it?" The American dream told you education was the ladder. Nobody mentioned the ladder was leased. 3. The house that debt built. You survived college, you've got the degree, you've got the job, maybe not the dream job, but a job. You're making payments on your student loans, you're splitting rent with a roommate or two, and you're starting to hear a new version of the question that's followed you your entire life. It used to be, where are you going to college? Now it's, when are you buying a house? Because in America, home ownership isn't just a financial decision, it's a moral achievement. It's proof that you've made it, that you're a real adult, that you're not throwing money away on rent like some kind of economic vagrant. Your parents ask about it. Your relatives ask about it at Thanksgiving. LinkedIn influencers post about it with photos of themselves holding keys in front of doors, grinning like they just unlocked the meaning of life. And behind all of it is a very specific, very deeply embedded American idea. Owning a home is the single best financial decision you'll ever make. Let's examine that idea. Because like most things in American life, it's about 40% true and 60% marketing. First, the history. The modern American obsession with home ownership didn't fall from the sky. It was built, deliberately, politically and financially, starting in the 1930s. Before the Great Depression, most Americans didn't own their homes. Those who did often had short-term loans, 5 to 10 years, with a massive balloon payment at the end. When the economy collapsed, millions defaulted. The housing market cratered. Banks failed. So the federal government stepped in and did something radical. In 1934, it created the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, which ensured long-term fixed-rate mortgages, making it possible for the first time for ordinary Americans to buy a house with a small down payment and pay it off over 30 years. Then, in 1938, it created Fannie Mae, the Federal National Mortgage Association, to buy those mortgages from banks, freeing up capital so banks could lend again. This was, by almost any measure, a brilliant piece of financial engineering. It democratized home ownership, it stabilized the housing market, it gave the middle class an asset to build wealth around. And it worked. The home ownership rate climbed from roughly 44% in 1940 to about 62% by 1960, according to US Census data. But, and you knew there was a but, it didn't work equally. The FHA's underwriting guidelines were explicitly, formally, and unapologetically racist. The agency used a practice called redlining, in which neighbourhoods were graded on a colour-coded map. Green meant safe for investment, red meant hazardous, and the criterion for hazardous was, in many cases, the presence of black residents. The FHA's own 1938 underwriting manual warned against lending in areas with inharmonious racial groups. This wasn't a fringe practice, it was federal policy, and it meant that for decades the primary wealth-building tool in America, the subsidized long-term mortgage, was available to white families and systematically denied to black ones. The downstream effects are still measurable today. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, 2022, the median net worth of white families is approximately $285,000. For black families, it's approximately $44,900. That's a ratio of more than 6 to 1, and the single largest component of household wealth in America. Home equity. So when people ask why the racial wealth gap persists, a significant part of the answer is sitting in the FHA's filing cabinets from the 1930s and 40s. But let's set history aside for a moment and talk about the present. Because even for Americans who can buy a house, the math has gotten increasingly brutal. The median home sale price in the United States hit approximately $417,700 in late 2024, according to the National Association of Realtors. Meanwhile, the median household income is roughly $80,610, according to the Census Bureau's 2023 data. That puts the price-to-income ratio at approximately 5.2 to 1. For perspective, the historical norm, the ratio that economists generally consider affordable, is somewhere around 3 to 3.5 to 1. In cities like Los Angeles, the ratio exceeds 10 to 1. In San Jose, it's closer to 11 to 1. In New York, it depends on whether you're looking at Manhattan, essentially infinite, or the outer boroughs, merely painful. And then there are the interest rates. If you bought a home in 2021, you might have locked in a 30-year fixed rate around 3%. If you're buying in 2025 or 2026, you're likely looking at rates in the 6.5% to 7.5% range, according to Freddie Mac's primary mortgage market survey. That difference is not trivial. On a $400,000 mortgage, the difference between a 3% rate and a 7% rate is roughly $1,000 per month, or more than $360,000 in additional interest over the life of the loan. So you're paying more for the house, you're paying more for the money to buy the house, and you're competing against cash buyers, institutional investors, and, increasingly, corporations that buy single-family homes to convert into rentals. According to a 2023 report from MetLife Investment Management, institutional investors purchased roughly 1 in every 4 single-family homes sold in certain metro areas during the post-pandemic housing boom. You're bidding against Wall Street, with a pre-approval letter and a dream. And yet, the cultural message hasn't changed. Rent is throwing money away. Home ownership builds wealth. A home is the best investment you'll ever make. Is it though? The economist Robert Shiller, the Nobel laureate who predicted both the dot-com bubble and the housing bubble, has spent decades studying this question. His data, which tracks home prices going back to 1890, shows that in real, inflation-adjusted terms, home prices have barely outpaced inflation over the long run. The average real return on housing excluding rental income is roughly 0.6% per year over more than a century of data. Compare that to the S&P 500, which has returned an average of roughly 7% per year in real terms over the same period. Now, and here's the nuance, Shiller isn't saying home ownership is bad. There are real benefits: stability, forced savings, tax advantages, the mortgage interest deduction, though it's less valuable since the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act raised the standard deduction, and the psychological comfort of having a place that's yours. These matter. They're real. But the idea that your house is a wealth-building machine, that it's going to make you rich, that it's always a better financial move than renting and investing the difference, that's not what the data says. What the data says is that housing is a consumption good with some investment characteristics, not the other way around, and yet the entire apparatus. The real estate industry, the mortgage industry, the home improvement industry, the property tax system, the cultural status hierarchy, all of it depends on Americans believing that buying a house is the most important financial thing they'll ever do. Because when you believe that, you'll stretch. You'll borrow more than you're comfortable with. You'll accept a 30-year obligation as if it's just what adults do. You'll pour money into renovations that don't return their cost because HGTV told you the kitchen needed an island. You'll sign up for a lifestyle of property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance, HOA fees, and the slow creeping realization that your investment needs a new roof every 20 years. The American dream said the house was the finish line. Nobody mentioned it was also a subscription service. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit subscribe. We're just getting to the expensive part, and trust me, it gets more expensive. 4. The body tax. Healthcare in the land of the free. You've got the degree, you've got the house, or at least the mortgage, you're making it work. The student loan payments are on autopilot, the property tax bill only made you nauseous for a minute, and you're starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, you're getting ahead. Then you feel a pain in your chest. It's probably nothing. Maybe stress, maybe the burrito. But it doesn't go away, so you do what any responsible adult would do. You go to the emergency room, you sit in a waiting area for 2 hours, a nurse takes your blood pressure, a doctor listens to your chest for 45 seconds, they run an EKG. They tell you it's not a heart attack, probably acid reflux, maybe anxiety. They hand you a pamphlet about stress management and send you home. 3 weeks later, the bill arrives. $4,300. You stare at it. You flip it over to see if there's a punchline on the back. There isn't. This is the American healthcare system, and the joke is the price, and it's being told at your expense. Let's get into the numbers, because the numbers in American healthcare don't just tell a story, they tell a horror story. The United States spends more on healthcare than any country on earth, both in total and per capita. According to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, national health expenditure in 2022 reached approximately $4.5 trillion, or about $13,493 per person. That's roughly 17.3% of GDP. Nearly 1 out of every $5 the American economy produces goes to healthcare. For comparison, Germany spends about $8,011 per person. France spends about $6,517. The United Kingdom spends about $5,493, and Japan, a country with one of the longest life expectancies on the planet, spends approximately $4,691 per person, according to OECD health statistics. So America spends roughly twice what most comparable nations spend. Surely that buys the best outcomes, right? It does. Not US life expectancy in 2023 was approximately 77.5 years, according to the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics. That places the US behind virtually every other high-income country. Japan's life expectancy is roughly 84, Switzerland's is about 83. Even the UK, which Americans love to mock for the NHS waiting times, comes in at roughly 81. The US also has a higher infant mortality rate than most peer nations, approximately 5.4 deaths per 1,000 live births, compared to about 3.1 in Germany and 1.8 in Japan, according to the World Bank. Spending the most, getting less. That's not an opinion, that's arithmetic. So where does the money go? Several places, but let's start with the one Americans interact with most directly: insurance. The American healthcare system is, at its core, an intermediary economy. Between you and the doctor, there's an insurance company. Between the insurance company and the hospital, there's a negotiation. Between the negotiation and your bill, there's a labyrinth of codes, deductibles, copays, co-insurance, out-of-pocket maximums, and coverage determinations that would make a tax attorney weep. The average annual premium for employer-sponsored family health insurance in 2024 was approximately $25,572, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation's Employer Health Benefits Survey. Of that, workers paid roughly $6,296 out of their own pockets, with employers covering the rest. But employers covering the rest is somewhat of an illusion. Most economists agree that the employer's share of the premium is effectively deducted from your wages. It's compensation you never see. Money that exists on a spreadsheet somewhere between your productivity and your paycheck, vanishing into Blue Cross Blue Shield's quarterly earnings. And even after paying those premiums, you're not done paying. The average deductible for a single worker in an employer plan was approximately $1,735 in 2024. That means you're paying thousands of dollars per year for the privilege of paying more money later, before your insurance actually begins to cover anything. This is the part where defenders of the American system say, but we have the best hospitals, the best specialists, the most advanced technology, and there's truth in that. The Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, MD Anderson, these are world-class institutions. For cutting-edge cancer treatment, complex cardiac surgery, or rare diseases, the United States genuinely has some of the finest medical infrastructure ever built. The argument for American healthcare is that at the very top, for people who can access it, it is extraordinary. But that qualifier, for people who can access it, is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting. According to the Census Bureau, approximately 27.6 million Americans were uninsured in 2023. And being insured doesn't mean being covered. The concept of underinsurance is massive. A 2024 Commonwealth Fund survey found that roughly 43% of working-age adults were inadequately insured, meaning they were either uninsured or had insurance that still left them exposed to catastrophic costs. This creates a uniquely American phenomenon, medical debt. A 2023 KFF analysis estimated that approximately 100 million Americans, nearly 1 in 3, carry some form of medical debt. It is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States, a distinction no other wealthy nation holds. You can do everything right, get the job, get the insurance, pay the premiums, and one bad diagnosis can still bury you. And the prices themselves. They're not set by any logic you'd recognize from other markets. In most industries, there's a relationship between cost and price. A thing costs a certain amount to produce, and the price reflects that cost plus a margin. In American healthcare, the price is often whatever the hospital decides to type into the billing system. This is the world of the charge master, the hospital's internal price list, which is essentially fictional. A bag of IV saline that costs a manufacturer less than $1 can be billed at $300 to $800 to a patient. An aspirin tablet that costs a fraction of a cent at a pharmacy can appear on a hospital bill at $25 to $50. The 2013 Time magazine investigation by Stephen Brill, titled Bitter Pill: Why Medical Bills Are Killing Us, pulled back the curtain on this system in excruciating detail. The charge master prices bear no relationship to cost, to Medicare rates, or to reality. They exist because in a system where prices are negotiated between hospitals and insurers behind closed doors, the starting number can be anything. And if you're uninsured, if you don't have a giant corporation negotiating on your behalf, you get the charge master price, the fantasy number, the number designed to be negotiated down from, except nobody told you there was a negotiation. This is the quiet machinery behind the American dream's most brutal invoice. The system doesn't just fail to keep you healthy affordably, it is structurally designed to obscure costs, maximize billing, and transfer financial risk to the individual. The complexity is not a bug, it's a moat. The harder it is for you to understand your bill, the less likely you are to contest it. And so, here you are. Chest pain turned out to be nothing. The bill turned out to be everything. You set up a payment plan, you add it to the stack, next to the student loans, next to the mortgage, another monthly auto debit, another piece of the dream financed and spread across years, and somewhere in a boardroom, a health insurance CEO is reporting record quarterly profits. United Health Group, the largest health insurer in the United States, reported revenues of approximately $371 billion in 2023, more than the GDP of Ireland. Their net income was roughly $22 billion. Your chest pain helped pay for that. You're welcome. 5. The credit score. America's social credit system that nobody calls a social credit system. Let's play a game. Imagine two people, same age, same job, same income, same city. Person A has a 780 credit score. Person B has a 580 credit score. Person A applies for a mortgage, gets approved. 6.5% interest rate. Monthly payment on a $350,000 loan, roughly $2,212. Total paid over 30 years, approximately $796,000. Person B applies for the same mortgage, gets approved, barely. 8.5% interest rate, monthly payment on the same $350,000 loan, roughly $2,689. Total paid over 30 years, approximately $968,000. Same house, same job, same salary. Person B pays $172,000 more over the life of the loan, roughly the price of a second house, because of a 3-digit number generated by an algorithm that most Americans don't fully understand. Welcome to the credit scoring system, America's other social credit score. The one we don't call a social credit score because that's what China does, and we'd never do anything like that, except we did it first. The modern credit scoring system was created in 1989 when the Fair Isaac Corporation, better known as FICO, introduced its first general-purpose credit score. The idea was straightforward: give lenders a standardized numerical way to assess borrower risk. Before FICO, lending decisions were made by individual bank officers using a combination of financial records, personal relationships, and, let's be honest, subjective judgments that were often influenced by race, gender, and neighborhood. The credit score was supposed to fix that, make it objective, make it fair, and in certain ways, it did. The FICO score removed some of the most explicitly discriminatory practices from lending. It standardized risk assessment. It made credit accessible to people who might otherwise have been denied by a biased loan officer. Now let's talk about what it actually became. Your FICO score, which ranges from 300 to 850, is calculated using 5 categories of data. Payment history, 35%, amount owed, 30%, length of credit history, 15%, new credit, 10%, and credit mix, 10%. These seem reasonable on the surface. Pay your bills on time, don't max out your cards, and maintain a long track record. Simple enough, but look closer. Length of credit history accounts for 15% of your score. This means that a 45-year-old who has had a credit card since college has a structural advantage over a 22-year-old who just entered the system. Your score penalizes you for being young, for being new, for not having started borrowing early enough. The system doesn't measure your responsibility. It measures your tenure as a borrower. Credit mix accounts for 10%. The scoring model rewards you for having multiple types of debt: a mortgage, an auto loan, a credit card, a student loan. In other words, the system literally incentivizes you to take on more kinds of debt. It doesn't reward you for being debt-free. It rewards you for being diversely indebted. And then there's the most perverse mechanic of all, credit utilization. This is the percentage of your available credit that you're currently using, and it accounts for a huge chunk of the amounts owed category. The optimal utilization rate is generally considered to be below 30%, with single digits being ideal. What this means in practice is that the system rewards you for having access to a lot of credit and using very little of it. Not for being frugal, not for saving, for having credit lines you could use but don't. This creates an absurd incentive structure. If you have $50,000 in available credit and carry a $2,000 balance, your utilization is 4%. Excellent. If you have $5,000 in available credit and carry the same $2,000 balance, your utilization is 40%. Damaging. Same spending behavior, same income, same responsibility. Wildly different scores. The system doesn't measure financial health. It measures your relationship with the lending industry, and that relationship determines almost everything. Your credit score doesn't just affect your mortgage rate. It affects your auto loan rate, your insurance premiums. Yes, in most states, insurers use credit-based insurance scores, your ability to rent an apartment, and increasingly, your ability to get a job. According to a 2023 survey by the Society for Human Resource Management, roughly 16% of employers run credit checks on some or all candidates. Certain states have restricted this practice, but in much of the country, a low credit score, which might be the result of medical debt, job loss, or divorce, can prevent you from getting the job that would help you fix the score. Read that again. The consequence of financial hardship can prevent you from escaping financial hardship. The system creates a feedback loop that punishes downward mobility and charges a premium for it. And who runs this system? 3 private companies: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. These are the 3 major credit bureaus, the organizations that collect your financial data, compile your credit reports, and feed the information into scoring models. They are not government agencies, they are for-profit corporations. Their customers are not you. Their customers are the lenders, insurers, and landlords who pay for access to your data. You are not the customer, you are the product. And how carefully do they handle your data? In 2017, Equifax suffered one of the largest data breaches in history, exposing the personal information of approximately 147 million Americans: social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, driver's license numbers. The company had known about the vulnerability for months before the breach and had failed to patch it. Equifax eventually settled with the FTC for approximately $700 million, which sounds like a lot until you realize it worked out to roughly $4.75 per affected person in initial payments. Your entire financial identity compromised for less than the price of a latte. And here's the part that ties it all back to the American dream. The credit system doesn't just measure your participation in the economy, it compels it. If you want to buy a house, the dream, you need a good credit score. To get a good credit score, you need to borrow money and pay it back reliably over a long period of time. To borrow money, you need credit cards, loans, and lines of credit. To manage those responsibly, you need income. To get income, you might need a credit check from an employer. To pass that credit check, you need a good score. The circle is closed. You cannot opt out. You cannot build the American dream on cash alone. Not practically. A person with 0 debt and $1 million in savings but no credit history will have a worse credit score than a person with $30,000 in debt spread across 5 accounts and a history of minimum payments. The system doesn't reward wealth, it rewards participation in the debt economy. And participation isn't optional. It's the price of entry into homeownership, into mobility, into the dream itself. In 2021, China's social credit system made international headlines, with Western media expressing horror at the idea that a government algorithm could determine a citizen's access to housing, travel, and opportunity based on a behavioral score. The irony was rich. America had been doing a version of this for decades. It just outsourced it to the private sector and called it financial responsibility. The difference? In China, the government runs the score. In America, 3 for-profit companies run it, and they charge you $39.99 a month to monitor the number they assigned you. That's not freedom. That's a subscription to your own surveillance. 6. The car you can't not buy. America's infrastructure trap. Here's a question that almost nobody in America thinks to ask, because the answer is so deeply embedded in daily life that it feels like gravity. Why do you need a car? Not want a car. Need one. Need it to get to work. Need it to buy groceries. Need it to take your kid to school. Need it to exist as a functioning participant in the economy. In most other wealthy nations, this isn't the case. In Tokyo, you can live a full, professional, middle-class life and never sit behind a steering wheel. In Amsterdam, you bike. In Paris, you take the metro. In London, the tube. In Zurich, a tram so clean and punctual it makes you wonder what the Swiss put in their water. In America, outside of maybe 5 or 6 cities, you drive. You drive or you don't participate. And that's not because Americans love cars more than other people. It's because America was built, physically, structurally, legislatively, to make driving the only viable option. And that construction was not an accident. Let's go back to the middle of the 20th century, the 1950s. Eisenhower is president. The suburbs are booming. And in 1956, Congress passes the Federal Aid Highway Act, authorizing the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highway, the largest public works project in American history at the time. The official justification was national defense, the ability to move troops and evacuate cities in the event of nuclear war. The practical result was something very different: the complete reorganization of American life around the automobile. Highways carved through cities, often through black and low-income neighborhoods. A pattern so consistent that it has its own body of academic literature. The construction of I-81 in Syracuse, I-95 in Miami's Overtown, and I-10 in New Orleans' Claiborne Corridor are just a few examples where thriving communities were demolished to make room for suburban commuters to drive through the city without ever having to stop in it. According to research by transportation scholar Deborah Archer, published in the Vanderbilt Law Review, highway construction displaced an estimated 475,000 households nationwide, disproportionately from communities of color. Simultaneously, America's existing public transit systems were being dismantled. The story of General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone Tire conspiring to buy and dismantle streetcar systems across American cities, known as the National City Lines Conspiracy, is sometimes dismissed as an oversimplified narrative. And to be fair, streetcar systems were already declining in many cities due to competition from buses and cars. But the corporate acquisitions were real, the conversions from rail to bus were real, and the broader trend, the systematic defunding and deprioritizing of public transit in favour of highways and automobiles, is thoroughly documented. By the 1970s, the transformation was complete. American cities had been redesigned for cars, not people. Zoning laws separated residential areas from commercial ones, making it illegal in many places to build a corner store in a neighbourhood. Minimum parking requirements mandated vast oceans of asphalt around every building. Suburban sprawl pushed housing further and further from employment centres, making commutes longer and transit less viable. The result is a country where 91% of American households own at least one car, according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Not because every household made a free consumer choice, because the built environment gives them no alternative, and that compulsory car ownership comes with a compulsory bill. According to AAA's 2024 Your Driving Cost Study, the average annual cost of owning and operating a new vehicle in the United States is approximately $12,182. That includes the car payment, insurance, fuel, maintenance, registration, and depreciation. For a pickup truck or SUV, which Americans increasingly buy because the roads are designed for them and the marketing is relentless, the figure climbs past $14,000. Over a typical car ownership lifespan of, say, 50 years of driving, that's roughly $600,000 to $700,000 spent on cars. That's not a luxury expenditure. That's a structural tax imposed by the way the country is built. And the financing? Oh, the financing. The average new car loan in America in 2024 carried a balance of approximately $40,851, according to Experian's State of the Automotive Finance Market report. The average interest rate was around 6.8% for new vehicles and roughly 12.0% for used vehicles. The average loan term has stretched to approximately 68 months, nearly 6 years, and a growing number of loans extend to 72 or even 84 months, which means some Americans are still paying for a car that's already depreciating faster than they can build equity in it. This is negative equity in motion, literally. According to Edmunds, approximately 24% of trade-ins in 2024 involved negative equity, meaning the borrower owed more on their existing car than it was worth. The average negative equity amount was roughly $6,500, so they roll that deficit into the next loan, buying a new car while still paying for the old one. It's debt on top of debt, layered like sediment, sinking slowly. And here's the structural trap that ties it all together. You need the car to get to work. You need the job to pay for the car. The car requires insurance, which is mandatory in almost every state. And the cost of that insurance is affected by, yes, your credit score. If you miss a car payment, your credit score drops. If your credit score drops, your insurance premium goes up. If you can't afford the insurance, you can't legally drive. If you can't drive, you can't get to work. If you can't get to work, you lose income. If you lose income, you miss more payments. It's another closed loop, another system where the entry fee is debt and the exit fee is more debt. And the thing that makes this uniquely American is that in most comparable countries, this loop simply doesn't exist. A person in Berlin or Barcelona or Seoul can live a perfectly middle-class life without ever taking out a car loan, paying for car insurance, or budgeting for gasoline. Not because those countries are wealthier, many are not, but because they invested in public transit infrastructure rather than highway infrastructure. They built cities for density rather than sprawl. They made the car optional rather than mandatory. The United States made a different choice, or more precisely, A combination of government policy, corporate lobbying, and suburban ideology made the choice for you, decades before you were born, and now you live with the invoice. Here's a number that puts it in perspective. The American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card gave US public transit infrastructure a grade of D-, the richest country in the history of the world, and its public transit earns the same grade as a student who only showed up for the final exam. Meanwhile, China has built over 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail since 2008. Japan's Shinkansen network has been running since 1964, with a cumulative passenger fatality count of 0. Spain, a country with a GDP roughly 1/10 the size of America's, has the second largest high-speed rail network in the world. America has Amtrak, which loses money on almost every route, arrives late roughly 30% of the time on long-distance trains, and charges you $200 for a trip that takes longer than driving. The American dream said freedom meant the open road. Nobody mentioned that the open road was a toll road, and you'd be making payments on the vehicle for the next 6 years. 7. The Retirement Mirage. 401ks and the privatization of growing old. Let's say you've done it all. You got the degree, you bought the house, you survived the healthcare system without going bankrupt, which in America is its own form of achievement. You've been making your car payments, maintaining your credit score, paying your taxes, doing everything the system told you to do. Now you're 55, maybe 60. And a new question arrives, the final boss of the American dream. Can you afford to stop working? In most wealthy countries, this question has a relatively straightforward answer, because most wealthy countries have public pension systems that provide retirees with a meaningful, predictable income based on their years of work. In France, the public pension replaces roughly 74% of a worker's pre-retirement earnings. In Germany, it's about 52%. In the Netherlands, the combination of public and quasi-mandatory occupational pensions replaces approximately 80%, according to OECD Pensions at a Glance, 2023. In the United States, Social Security and the public pension replaces roughly 40% of pre-retirement income for the average earner. For higher earners, the replacement rate is even lower. And unlike pensions in many peer countries, Social Security was never designed to be a full retirement income. It was designed as a floor, a safety net to prevent elderly poverty. The expectation, increasingly, is that Americans will fill the gap themselves, and the primary tool they've been given to do that? The 401k. Here's the history, because the history is important, and frankly, kind of wild. The 401k was not invented as a retirement system. It was born from a loophole. In 1978, Congress passed the Revenue Act, which included a provision, Section 401k of the Internal Revenue Code, that allowed employees to defer a portion of their compensation into a tax-advantaged account. The provision was intended to address a narrow question about the tax treatment of executive deferred compensation plans. It was not designed to replace pensions. It was not designed to be the primary retirement vehicle for 100 million Americans. But that's exactly what it became. A benefits consultant named Ted Benner is generally credited with recognizing the potential of Section 401k and creating the first employer-sponsored 401k plan in 1981. The concept spread rapidly. Employers loved it, because a 401k shifts the financial risk of retirement from the company to the employee. A traditional pension, known as a defined benefit plan, guarantees a specific monthly income in retirement, and the employer bears the investment risk. A 401k, a defined contribution plan, guarantees nothing. It just gives you an account and says, good luck. The numbers tell the story of the transition. In 1980, approximately 38% of private sector workers had access to a defined benefit pension. By 2023, that number had collapsed to roughly 15%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Meanwhile, 401k-style plans became dominant. The shift didn't happen because employees demanded it. It happened because corporations realized they could eliminate a massive unpredictable liability from their balance sheets and replace it with a system where the employee assumes all the risk. And what does that risk look like? The average 401k balance for Americans aged 55 to 64, the people closest to retirement, was approximately $244,750 in 2023, according to Fidelity's retirement analysis. The median is significantly lower, roughly $71,168 for the same age group, according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. The median matters more than the average, because a handful of millionaires skew the average upward. The median tells you what the typical person has. Let's do the math on that median. If you retire at 65 with $71,168 in your 401k and follow the commonly cited 4% withdrawal rule, which financial planners generally recommend to make your money last 30 years, you can withdraw approximately $2,847 per year. That's $237 per month. $237 a month from the system that was supposed to replace your pension. Even if we add Social Security, the average monthly benefit was approximately $1,907 in 2024, according to the Social Security Administration. You're looking at a total retirement income of roughly $2,144 per month. That's $25,728 per year. In a country where the average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment is over $1,500 in most metro areas, and a single unexpected medical bill can run into thousands. This is not a retirement plan. This is a controlled descent into poverty with a tax advantage. And the system has a particularly cruel feature. It punishes the people who can least afford it. Lower-income workers are less likely to have access to an employer-sponsored 401k in the first place. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only about 53% of private industry workers had access to a retirement plan in 2023. Among the lowest-paid quartile, participation rates were even lower. Many of these workers are in part-time, gig, or contract roles that offer no retirement benefits at all. Even among those who do have access, many can't afford to contribute enough. The IRS allows employees to defer up to $23,000 per year, as of 2024, into a 401k, with an additional $7,500 catch-up contribution for those over 50. But the median American household income is around $80,000. After taxes, housing, food, transportation, healthcare, student loans, childcare, and the general cost of existing, the idea that the average worker can set aside $23,000 a year is not just unrealistic, it's almost comedic. And who benefits the most from the 401k system? High earners. The tax deduction for 401k contributions is worth more to someone in the 37% tax bracket than to someone in the 12% bracket. The employer match, which is essentially free money, disproportionately benefits employees who can afford to contribute enough to capture it. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the top 20% of income earners hold approximately 65% of all retirement account wealth. The bottom 50% hold virtually nothing. The 401k was sold as the democratization of investing. In practice, it's a system where the wealthy accumulate tax-advantaged wealth, the middle class accumulates anxiety, and the working class accumulates nothing. And here's the final twist. The financial services industry, the companies that manage your 401k, charges you for the privilege. Expense ratios, administrative fees, and advisory fees quietly drain your account over decades. A seemingly small fee of 1% per year can consume roughly 28% of your total returns over a 30-year period, according to analysis by the US Department of Labor. You're paying someone to manage money that you're saving because nobody will pay you a pension anymore. Ted Benner himself, the man who created the first 401k, has gone on record expressing regret about what the system became. In interviews, he's described the 401k as a monster that grew far beyond its intended scope and became too complex and too expensive for ordinary Americans to navigate effectively. The creator of the system called it a monster, and we're all still feeding it because nobody offered us another option. Meanwhile, Social Security, the one public retirement program that does work, that has kept millions of elderly Americans out of poverty since its creation in 1935, faces its own fiscal challenges. The Social Security Board of Trustees' 2024 report projects that the combined old age and survivors insurance (OASI) trust fund reserves will be depleted by approximately 2033. After that, incoming payroll tax revenue would be sufficient to cover only about 79% of scheduled benefits, unless Congress acts. The The solutions are well known: raise the payroll tax cap, increase the tax rate modestly, adjust benefits, or some combination. But political gridlock makes action uncertain. So the American Dream's final chapter reads like this: work for 40 years. Fund your own retirement through a system that was never designed for you. Hope the stock market cooperates. Hope your health holds. Hope Social Security is still there when you need it. And if all of that works out, if you are disciplined and fortunate and nothing goes catastrophically wrong, you might be able to stop working before your body forces you to. In France, they rioted over raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. In America, there are people working at Walmart at 74 because they can't afford not to. Same planet, different dreams. 8. The Childcare Paradox. Pay to work, work to pay. Here's a scenario that will sound absurd until you realize it's just Tuesday for millions of American families. You and your partner both work. You have to. One income doesn't cover the mortgage, the car payments, the insurance, the student loans, and the groceries. Not even close, so you both work. And then you have a child. And the moment the child arrives, beautiful, miraculous, utterly dependent, you're confronted with a math problem that would stump a PhD economist. How do you pay someone to watch your child while you work at a job that exists partly to pay someone to watch your child? This is the American childcare paradox, and it is, per dollar, one of the most punishing structural costs in the entire dream. Let's start with the numbers. According to Childcare Aware of America's 2023 report, the average annual cost of centre-based childcare for an infant in the United States is approximately $15,417. In the high-cost states, it's dramatically worse. In Massachusetts, the average exceeds $21,000 per year. In Washington, D.C., it's over $24,000. For reference, annual in-state tuition at a public university is roughly $11,610. In much of America, it is now more expensive to put a baby in daycare than to send a teenager to college. Let that fully register. The cost of someone watching your infant while you go to work exceeds the cost of your child earning a bachelor's degree, and you're paying the daycare bill while also saving for the college bill, simultaneously, with the same paycheck. And here's where the paradox becomes a trap. The US Department of Health and Human Services defines affordable childcare as costing no more than 7% of household income. By that standard, childcare is unaffordable for the vast majority of American families. A household earning the median income of approximately $80,000 should, by HHS guidelines, be paying no more than $5,600 per year on childcare. The actual cost is nearly 3 times that in most states, and 4 to 5 times that in expensive metro areas. So what do families do? Some do the math, and one parent, usually statistically the mother, leaves the workforce. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the labor force participation rate for mothers with children under 6 is approximately 68%, compared to roughly 93% for fathers in the same situation. That gap isn't explained by preference alone. Surveys consistently show that a significant portion of stay-at-home parents would prefer to work but cannot afford the childcare that working requires. A 2023 survey by Rapid Response Monitoring found that 72% of parents reported that the cost of childcare impacted their career decisions, and the economic consequence of that decision is massive and permanent. When a parent exits the workforce for 5 years to raise a child, they don't just lose 5 years of income. They lose 5 years of career advancement, salary growth, 401k contributions, Social Security credits, and professional network development. Research by the Center for American Progress has estimated that a woman who leaves the workforce for 5 years to care for children loses, on average, roughly $467,000 in lifetime earnings and benefits, a figure that accounts for lost wages, reduced future earnings due to the career gap, and foregone retirement savings. Nearly $500,000, not because she did something wrong, because the country has no functional childcare infrastructure and she did the math. There are people who genuinely choose to stay home because they want to, because they value being present for their children's early years. That's a legitimate, honourable choice, and nothing in this analysis diminishes it. The critique isn't about individual choices, It's about a system where the choice is often coerced by cost rather than made freely. And how does the rest of the developed world handle this? In France, public crèche nurseries are subsidised by the government, and families pay on a sliding scale, based on income. Out-of-pocket costs are typically a fraction of what American families pay. In Germany, childcare has been a legal entitlement for children over the age of 1 since 2013, with costs capped at a few €100 per month in most states, and Berlin made public daycare free in 2018. In Sweden, childcare fees are capped at approximately $165 per month for the first child, regardless of the type of care, according to the Swedish National Agency for Education. In the United States, the federal government spends relatively little on direct childcare subsidies. The Child Care and Development Block Grant, CCDBG, the primary federal childcare program, serves only about 1 in 6 eligible children, according to the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP. The rest are on waiting lists, or more likely, not applying at all because the process is labyrinthine and the slots are gone before they finish the paperwork. There was a moment briefly when this might have changed. In 2021, the Biden administration's Build Back Better Act proposed approximately $400 billion for universal pre-K and childcare subsidies, which would have capped childcare costs at 7% of income for most families. The bill passed the House. It died in the Senate. The childcare provisions were never resurrected in any subsequent legislation. So the current system persists, and the current system works like this. You need 2 incomes to afford a household, but you can't afford the childcare that 2 incomes require. You either pay an amount that devours one partner's entire salary, making the second job essentially a break-even proposition, or one partner drops out, absorbs the career penalty, and hopes to re-enter the workforce later at a steep discount. Either way, the system extracts a toll, either in cash or in opportunity, often both. And here's the part that connects it to everything else we've discussed. The childcare cost isn't happening in isolation. It's happening on top of the student loans, on top of the mortgage, on top of the healthcare premiums, on top of the car payments. Every section of this video isn't a separate bill, it's a stack. Each layer compresses the one beneath it. The American dream isn't killed by any single cost. It's crushed by the aggregate weight of all of them pressing down simultaneously on the same household budget. And this is why the US birth rate keeps declining. In 2023, the total fertility rate in the United States dropped to approximately 1.62 births per woman, according to provisional CDC data, the lowest rate ever recorded. This is well below the 2.1 replacement rate needed to maintain a stable population without immigration. And while declining birth rates are a trend in most developed nations, the American decline is happening in a country that has no universal paid parental leave, no universal childcare, and no universal health care, which means the financial exposure of having a child in America is among the highest in the developed world. People aren't choosing not to have kids because they don't want them. They're running the numbers, and the numbers say the American dream includes a family, but the American budget doesn't include the cost of one. If this video is making you rethink a few things, or at least confirming things you already suspected, drop a comment below. Tell me which part hit the hardest. And if you want more videos that break down the actual mechanics of how systems work, not just the brochure version, subscribe. It helps more than you think. 9. The Hustle Gospel. Why America monetized your free time. You'd think, after all of this, the degree, the house, the healthcare, the car, the childcare, the retirement account that's more hope than plan, you'd at least get to rest. You'd think there'd be a point in the American experience where someone says, "Okay, you've done enough. Sit down, read a book, stare at a wall, be a human being for a few unmonetized hours." But no, because America has one more trick up its sleeve, one more way to extract value from you, and it might be the most psychologically ingenious one of all. It convinced you that your free time is a waste. Welcome to hustle culture, the uniquely American innovation of turning rest into guilt, hobbies into side businesses, and every waking hour into a potential revenue stream. The idea isn't just that you should work hard at your job, the idea is that your job isn't enough. You should also have a side hustle, a personal brand, a passive income, stream, a dropshipping store, a podcast, an Etsy shop, a Substack, a course teaching other people how to build the thing you haven't actually built yet. This isn't fringe. This is mainstream American ideology in the 2020s, and it has a theology, complete with profits, scriptures, and tithes. The profits are the influencer entrepreneurs, the Gary V's, the Grant Cardones, the nameless army of LinkedIn motivational posters who film themselves at 4:30 a.m. in a cold plunge, captioning it, "While you were sleeping, I was building an empire." The scripture is the endless stream of books, podcasts, and YouTube videos about productivity optimization, morning routines, and the millionaire mindset. And the tithe? The tithe is your time, your sleep, your health, and your relationships, sacrificed on the altar of output. The cultural roots of this run deep. The sociologist Max Weber identified the connection between Protestant work ethic and capitalism over a century ago in the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, 1905. Weber argued that certain strains of Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, created a psychological framework in which hard work and material success were interpreted as signs of divine favour. Laziness wasn't just unproductive, it was sinful. This theological DNA didn't disappear with secularization. It mutated. The language shifted from God rewards the industrious to the market rewards the industrious, but the underlying moral structure remained identical. In America, this ethic merged with capitalism to produce something no other country has quite replicated. A culture where not working is a moral failure, and where the boundaries between labour and life are treated not as protections, but as obstacles to success. The data reflects this. According to the OECD, American workers work an average of approximately 1,811 hours per year. For comparison, German workers average roughly 1,341 hours. French workers average about 1,511 hours. Even Japanese workers, long stereotyped as overworked, average approximately 1,607 hours, which is 200 fewer hours per year than Americans. The only OECD countries that consistently work more hours than the US are Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia, none of which are typically held up as models of work-life balance. And here's the critical detail. Americans work those hours without the safety net that workers in peer countries enjoy. The United States is the only wealthy nation that does not guarantee paid parental leave at the federal level, 0 weeks. The Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA of 1993, guarantees up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, and only if you work for a company with 50 or more employees, have been there for at least a year, and have logged at least 1,250 hours. Roughly 44% of workers don't qualify, according to the Department of Labor. The United States is also the only advanced economy that does not mandate paid vacation days, not a single one. According to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, the US is the only country among 21 wealthy nations studied that has no legal requirement for paid vacation or paid holidays. The European Union mandates a minimum of 4 weeks of paid vacation. In Austria and France, workers get at least 5 weeks plus public holidays. In America, the standard offering is 2 weeks, if your employer feels like it. And roughly 1 in 4 private sector workers has no paid vacation at all, according to BLS data. The result is a workforce that is, by virtually every metric, more burned out than its counterparts in comparable countries. A 2024 Gallup survey found that approximately 44% of global workers reported experiencing significant stress the previous day, but American workers consistently report among the highest levels of workplace stress and burnout in the developed world. The American Institute of Stress estimates that workplace stress costs US businesses roughly $300 billion per year in absenteeism, turnover, diminished productivity, and healthcare costs. And into this exhaustion, hustle culture whispers, "You're not doing enough, not working enough, not optimizing enough, not monetizing enough." That commute, listen to a business podcast. That lunch break, network. That weekend, build your brand. That vacation, if you even take one, content creation opportunity. The gig economy is both a product and a reinforcement of this mentality. There are approximately 64 million Americans who performed freelance work in 2023, according to a study commissioned by Upwork. Many of these are skilled professionals choosing flexibility, but a significant portion are people working gig jobs, driving for Uber, delivering for DoorDash, picking up task rabbit shifts, not because they're entrepreneurs, but because their primary job doesn't pay enough. According to a 2023 McKinsey survey, roughly 36% of employed Americans identified as independent workers in some capacity, and a substantial portion of those cited financial necessity rather than preference as the primary driver. They're not hustling because they're ambitious. They're hustling because they're behind. Behind on rent, behind on loans, behind on the dream. The side hustle isn't a ladder, it's a treadmill dressed up in motivational language. And the motivational language matters because it serves a structural purpose. If you believe your financial struggles are the result of insufficient effort, if you believe you just need to wake up earlier, work later, hustle harder, then you won't ask uncomfortable questions about why a full-time job doesn't cover the basics in the richest country in the world. The hustle gospel individualizes systemic problems. It converts economic failure into personal inadequacy. It makes the architecture invisible by focusing all your attention on the mirror. The writer Malcolm Harris, in his book Kids These Days, Human Capital and the Making of Millennials, calls this the human capital framework. The idea that every person is essentially a small business, and your job is to continually increase your market value through education, skill acquisition, personal branding, and relentless self-optimization. Under this framework, you're not a person, you're a portfolio. And like any portfolio, you're always one bad quarter away from being worth less. This is why Americans feel guilty for resting. Not because rest is unproductive. Any physiologist will tell you that rest is essential for productivity. But because the culture has defined worth so completely through output that doing nothing feels like losing. The French have a phrase, la douceur de vivre, the sweetness of living. It refers to the pleasure of simply existing, of a long lunch, a slow evening, an afternoon that has no purpose except being alive. In America, that afternoon has an opportunity cost, and someone on Instagram is calculating it for you. The American dream didn't just put a price tag on your ambitions, it put a price tag on your stillness. And then it told you that if you're not converting every hour into progress, you're falling behind. Falling behind whom? The person in the cold plunge at 4:30 a.m., who is also, by the way, trying to sell you something. 10. The dream tax, who profits when you believe. We've walked through the machine piece by piece. The education system that charges you to qualify, the housing market that leverages your aspiration, the healthcare apparatus that bills you for breathing, the credit system that scores your obedience, the infrastructure that forces you to buy a car, the retirement system that replaced your pension with a coin flip, the childcare economy that punishes you for reproducing, the hustle culture that monetizes your exhaustion. Now let's step back and ask the question that ties all of it together. Who benefits from this arrangement? Not in a conspiratorial sense, not in a shadowy figures in a boardroom sense, but structurally, mechanically. Follow the money and ask, when 330 million people are taught to dream big and then handed the bill, who's processing the payment? Let's start with the most obvious answer, the financial sector. The American dream as it currently operates is a debt-financed dream. Almost every milestone, education, housing, transportation, healthcare, retirement, involves borrowing. And borrowing means interest. And interest means revenue for the institutions that lend. The US consumer debt market is staggering. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, total household debt in the United States reached approximately $17.94 trillion in the third quarter of 2024. That includes roughly $12.6 trillion in mortgage debt, $1.77 trillion in student loan debt, $1.64 trillion in auto loan debt, and $1.17 trillion in credit card debt. Nearly $18 trillion in household debt. In context, that's larger than the GDP of every country on Earth except the United States itself and China. And every dollar of that debt is generating revenue for someone. The net interest income of US commercial banks, the money they make from the spread between what they pay on deposits and what they charge on loans, was approximately $684 billion in 2023, according to FDIC data. That's not total revenue, that's just the interest margin. The money made from the gap between what you earn on your savings account, probably around 0.5% if your bank is feeling generous, And what you pay on your mortgage, your car loan, or your credit card, 6%, 8%, 22% respectively. The dream runs on debt. The debt runs through banks. The banks run on the spread, and the spread is your life. But it's not just banks. The entire financial advisory industry, which manages retirement accounts, sells insurance products, and offers investment services, generates roughly $140 billion in annual revenue in the United States, according to IBIS World. The health insurance industry generates over $1.3 trillion in annual premiums. The real estate industry, agents, brokers, title companies, mortgage services, generates hundreds of billions more. Each of these industries sits at a toll booth on the road to the American dream, and each of them has a vested interest in making sure you keep driving. This is not a conspiracy. It's an ecosystem, a self-reinforcing system where the cultural narrative, dream big, work hard, you'll make it, generates demand, and the financial infrastructure converts that demand into revenue streams. The narrative isn't false in the way that a lie is false. It's false in the way that a casino's marketing is false. Technically, someone does win. The odds just aren't what the brochure implies, and the ecosystem has a lobbying arm that ensures the rules stay favourable. According to Open Secrets, the financial sector, including banking, insurance and real estate, spent approximately $952 million on lobbying in 2023 alone. The healthcare industry spent approximately $738 million. Together, these two sectors account for the largest share of lobbying expenditure in Washington, more than defense, more than energy, more than tech. They're not spending that money to protect your interests. They're spending it to protect the architecture, the set of rules, regulations, tax structures, and policy frameworks that keep the debt flowing, the premiums rising, and the bills arriving. Consider a single example, the carried interest loophole, which allows hedge fund and private equity managers to pay the capital gains tax rate, currently 20%, instead of the ordinary income tax rate, up to 37% on much of their compensation, has survived multiple attempts at reform across both Democratic and Republican administrations. Every few years, a politician proposes closing it. Every few years, the financial lobby kills the effort. The estimated cost to the Treasury? Roughly $18 billion over a decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. That's $18 billion in tax revenue forfeited, so that some of the wealthiest people in the country can pay a lower effective tax rate than their secretaries, as Warren Buffett famously pointed out. The system doesn't just bill you for the dream, it subsidizes the people who profit from the billing. And here's the part that makes it durable, almost unshakable. The American dream isn't maintained by force, it's maintained by belief. By the psychological infrastructure we discussed in Section 1, the deep, early, culturally reinforced conviction that the system is fundamentally fair, that outcomes reflect effort, and that anyone who fails simply didn't want it enough. This belief does something remarkable. It turns the people being billed into defenders of the billing system. If you believe the dream is real and fair, then criticizing the system feels like criticizing your own potential. Questioning the structure feels like admitting you can't make it. And so, the very people who are most burdened by the costs are often the most vocal in defending the arrangement. Because the alternative is accepting that the game might be, in some fundamental way, rigged. The political scientist John Steinbeck, well, the novelist, but the observation is political science, reportedly said that socialism never took root in America because Americans don't see themselves as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Whether or not Steinbeck actually said this, the attribution is debated, and likely a paraphrase of a passage from America and Americans. The observation captures something empirically true. Americans consistently identify with the class they aspire to rather than the class they belong to. A 2020 Gallup poll found that roughly 29% of Americans believe they will eventually be rich. Among those earning less than $30,000 a year, 21% believe the same. This isn't delusion, it's the dream doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping you oriented toward the future, toward the possibility, toward the next rung on the ladder. And while you're looking up, you're less likely to look around and notice that the ladder is leaning against a building you'll never own. But here's where I want to be careful. because this video isn't an argument that the American dream is a complete fraud. That would be too simple, and simple is usually wrong. The truth is more uncomfortable than that. The American dream works, for some people. The data shows that upward mobility, while lower than the mythology suggests, is not zero. The United States still attracts more immigrants than any country on Earth. Roughly 1 million legal permanent residents per year, according to the Department of Homeland Security, and many of them do build better lives here. The entrepreneurial infrastructure, the venture capital ecosystem, the cultural tolerance for risk and failure. These are real advantages that other countries genuinely struggle to replicate. The problem isn't that the dream is entirely false, the problem is that it's selectively true, and the selection isn't random. It correlates with starting position, with geography, with race, with the presence or absence of a financial safety net. The dream works best for people who need it least, and the people who need it most are the ones most likely to be buried under the bill. The American dream is not a lie. It's a lottery marketed as a guarantee, and the house always wins. 11. Final thoughts. The invoice and the awakening. So here we are, at the end of the invoice. Let's tally it up. Not to be depressing, but to be precise. Because the American dream deserves precision. It's been running on poetry for too long. Let's give it some arithmetic. The average American who follows the script, gets the degree, buys the house, drives the car, raises a kid, funds the retirement account and pays for healthcare along the way, will generate over the course of a lifetime something in the range of the following obligations. Student loans, approximately $37,000 in principal, often $60,000 to $80,000, plus after interest on standard repayment plans. Housing, a $400,000 home at 7% over 30 years, costs approximately $958,000 in total payments, more than double the purchase price. Healthcare, at an average of $13,000 plus per person per year, a household of 4 will spend well over $1 million on healthcare cost over a working lifetime. Premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and uncovered expenses combined. Transportation, at roughly $12,000 per year for 50 years of driving, that's approximately $600,000, conservatively. Childcare. 2 children in centre-based care for 5 years each at average national costs, roughly $150,000 to $200,000. Retirement shortfall, the gap between what the average American saves and what they actually need for a 20 to 30-year retirement is, for most households, measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Added up in the American dream, the full package, the house, and the kids, and the health, and the education, and the old age, carries a multi-million-dollar price tag that most Americans will spend their entire working lives trying and often failing to cover. And every single one of these costs is higher in the United States than in virtually every comparable wealthy nation. Not marginally higher, structurally higher, by factors of 2, 3, sometimes 5. Not because Americans consume more recklessly, but because the systems that deliver these goods, education, housing, healthcare, transportation, childcare, retirement, are designed differently. They are designed to route costs to the individual rather than distribute them collectively. They are designed to generate private profit at each stage, and they are wrapped in a cultural narrative that frames this arrangement as freedom. The narrative says, you have choice. You can choose your school, choose your house, choose your doctor, choose your car, choose your retirement plan. What it doesn't say is that the choices are pre-structured, the menu is curated, and the prices on that menu are set by industries that spend billions ensuring the menu doesn't change. But, and I want to end here, because endings matter, none of this means the dream is worthless. It means the dream is incomplete. It tells you what to want, but not what it costs. It tells you to climb, but not who built the ladder or who owns the building. It tells you to believe in yourself, which is fine, genuinely. But it doesn't tell you to also believe in systems that make individual belief less of a gamble. The countries that outperform the United States on upward mobility, on health outcomes, on retirement security, on childcare access, they didn't get there by telling people to stop dreaming. They got there by building infrastructure around the dream. Public universities that don't require a second mortgage, healthcare systems that don't bankrupt the sick, transit networks that don't mandate car ownership, pension systems that don't depend on stock market performance, childcare systems that don't cost more than college. They didn't kill ambition, they just stopped billing it at compound interest. The American dream isn't dead, but it is overpriced, underleveraged, and badly in need of structural renovation. And the first step toward fixing it is the same first step toward fixing anything. Stop believing the brochure and start reading the contract. Every number in this video is real. Every system we walk through is documented, and every cost we tallied is being paid right now by real people who were told that hard work was all it would take. They deserved better information. So do you. If you made it this far, you're not a casual viewer, you're invested. So let me ask you something in the comments. Which section hit the hardest? Was it the education system, the healthcare math, the retirement numbers, the childcare trap? Let me know. Your responses shape what this channel covers next. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon. We do deep dives like this regularly, not just on America, but on the systems, structures, and psychology behind how the modern world actually works. If you want to keep going, I'd recommend watching our upcoming video on the student loan machine and why the middle class is a subscription service. Thank you for watching, thank you for thinking, and I'll see you in the next one.